Last time on Progression D.
Grant from Battle Garage.
Hey, what's up, guys? Today we want to talk about anything that has to do with the handling and how the car drives. So we'll be talking about control arms, wheels and tires, braking, steering, things like that. So yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah, you know, some of the guys on the forum are asking, or the Facebook group are asking, what kind of caster we like to run. I don't remember the exact numbers for my car. Do you remember what you're running on yours?
I think it was like 4 to 4.5. I like it as far forward as possible. That helps with center steering. So when you're drifting and you go to transition, the car will self-steer. So you can practically almost let go of the wheel as it comes around and catch it again.
Yeah.
And I like the feedback it gives me from like what the wheels are doing. Mm-hmm. So at more lock, you can actually feel the car communicating with you of like what's it's doing. So it helps with like I guess like, you know, putting yourself where you want to be, knowing if you're understeering or oversteering. So it also helps with like learning. So it gives you more confidence and like getting more angle, getting more speed. So I personally like more caster, but it can be really heavy too.
Yeah.
So I don't really see it too often with like grip driving because you don't really need that crazy lock and too much caster.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've seen is I've seen some people have a manual rack setup, which you know I personally like, gives a lot of feel. But I've seen some people like not like it because the steering wheel was so high during parking, right?
Yes.
Especially parallel parking, right? It sucks. And you know, usually I'll just recommend to try to back off the caster. I think on my hatchback with manual steering, I think since that was more of a street-driven car, I think I was around like 2.5 degrees of caster. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to have all those things for drifting. But since I did drive the car on the street a lot, I liked that I could still get decent feedback, but it was just a lot nicer to drive.
Yeah,
on
a lot lighter
basis.
too.
Yeah.
So Grant, I'm running a Costco sway bar, and they're not adjustable, but I'm happy with the way it's set up right now. Are there any benefits for me specifically if I go for a adjustable sway bar?
Yeah, so we usually use an adjustable sway bar as like the last method of tuning how the car is handling, or if you're driving in different types of scenarios. So if you're going to the autocross, you might want to have a little more rotation so you can quickly get around the cones. In that case, you would set up the sway bar to be on the softer side, so you've got more front grip. Or if you're doing more high-speed events where you're cornering like, you know, really high speeds, you want more stability, so you might set the sway bar up to be stiffer on the front. So it'll make the front end tighter and make the front want to let go sooner than the rear, which is basically stability, and you want to kind of fine-tune that. But for the most part, you want to get the basic parts of your chassis handling done with the spring rates and other tuning first before you do the sway bar. So the sway bar should be like the last, you know, means to like fine-tune it. Oh, and then one other thing I want to mention about this is Ezekiel at CM Auto House helped us find that the white line adjustable sway bar can make contact with a stock brake setup on a stock car, and so that's something to be aware of. I personally didn't have this issue myself because I had a longer control arm, so my brake caliper was further away and I was totally fine. But if you do have a stock lower control arm, it might be something to keep in mind if you're thinking about going to that adjustable white line bar. You know, the last thing I want to point out is I see you've got some polyurethane bushings, right? Mm-hmm. How do you like those, by the way?
Yeah, they feel great. The suspension's very responsive. It's a little bit harsh on bumps, but yeah, it felt like a needed upgrade.
Yeah, our you know, one thing is I think people will go straight to Heim joints very quickly, and I feel that there's a time and place to do that. If you are competing with the car and you're running a really sticky tire, like an actual R-Comp tire, you know, like a dedicated track tire, then you're probably going to want a Heim joint. If you are driving with a less aggressive tire, like maybe even these guys, polyurethane is a great way to get the chassis to be tighter, so you don't have that 35 or whatever, you know, year-old rubber on the car, without all the downsides from the Heims, which is increased road noise, a little bit more maintenance because you got to keep them lubricated. And so it's kind of, there's like a spectrum on how far you want to go. And I think in general, simpler is better. You don't want to go too aggressive with the type of joints you have. So can you tell us more about the modifications you have on the back of your car?
Yeah, so in the back I kept it a little bit simple. So I have the Cusco rear sway bar, and I added the T3 drop links just to help with the lowered rear end. I have the T3 panhard bar with the T3 drop rear bracket for the panhard bar. And yeah, just polyurethane bushings. I kept it simple. I have the stock 4 links. I have the stock 2-piece drive shaft, and I felt like I didn't need to change that. Just yeah, it was just good.
You know, I'm actually a big fan of this. On my own race car, we kept a lot of the parts. We only modified what we needed to modify. So I actually have stock 4 links with just polyurethane bushings as well. I don't have drop links, which you know, some people will use to try to get more bite coming out of the turns. But I used to drift the car, so I actually wanted to be able to spin the tires. So that one's kind of like, depending on how you want to use the car. And one good thing I see here is you've got the T3 lateral rod, but you also have the drop mount. And the reason why that's important is, as you lower the car, the lateral rod is going to tilt up, and as the suspension arcs, it's going to be pulling an axle, you know, left and right. So if you get it back down horizontal, then you have less arc changes as the suspension goes up and down. There's also a benefit by lowering the rear roll center, which will keep the inside tire from picking up as much, as there's more the roll center's like lower, so you've got less leverage going on it. And then you also have the T3 drop mount for the sway bar, which helps to keep the angles correct. And the Cusco bar is nice. Like I said, I personally like to use a stock rear bar here and use spring rate tuning to get the rest dialed in. So we're under Nick's car here. We decided to switch it up because Nick has more adjustable rear suspension parts and drivetrain parts. So I can kind of field some of the questions that some of you guys were asking in the Facebook group. So one question that came up is, you know, how to properly set the pinion angle. And you know, to be honest, I'm not an expert on this because my car just has a 2-piece drive shaft and I have stock end links. Stock 4 links. But what I have talked to Ezekiel at CM Auto House, and I think he studied this quite a bit. And he was telling me that the important part is that you get the angles of the pinion and the angle of the output shaft of the transmission, or the front of the drive shaft, basically, to be parallel. If you start to have one go off, you'll start getting some weird you know, binding and twisting effects that really mess up seals. So that's the important part, is to get the angles parallel. And I think that's one of the times where you should be looking into having adjustable 4 links. I see Nick has some T3 ones here. And one thing that comes up a lot is, should people get the fully heimed 4 links or panhard rod, or should they get one with bush? I personally prefer to have one end poly and one end Heim if you're going to be making that kind of modification. And the reason is A, you get less noise transmitted into the cabin from NVH, but also as the axle is going up and down, there's less chance of the axle binding as it's going through its articulation. If there's anything where the angles are kind of fighting each other, you've got a little bit of play on that bushing to allow it to just kind of do its thing. The other thing is having softer, like having a bushing on one end, it can actually give you more grip in a lot of cases, because you're letting the tire work with the pavement and stick to it. Whereas if you have just Heim end joints, there's no plan of suspension. So if the tire gets to an abrupt surface change, or like you know, maybe like a small divot in the road or something like that, if you have just Heims all the way around, it's going to kind of break the tire loose, so you don't get to stick to the pavement as well. If you have a little bit of bushing material in there, it can kind of help with traction. This car has a aftermarket coilover setup, and one question we get a lot is, how do you set the rear height adjustment and also keep the springs preloaded? So we just thought we'd take advantage of the opportunity and talk about it. So you can see there's an adjustable perch up here, which goes on the chassis side. And this is the same whether it's, you know, Annex, Megan, BC, you know, whatever. They're all going to mount on the top here. And the idea is, you want to have your shock completely, you want to loosen the bottom lock ring and have this threaded all the way up to give you plenty of slack to go up and down. So to basically make the shock as long as possible. The next thing you do is you will adjust this until you get the ride height how you want. So you'd be adjusting this evenly on both sides. You set the car down, you know, measure the ride height with a tape measure, And when you got it to where you want, bring the car back up, make sure to lock the lock ring, and then you're going to adjust, you're going to loosen the lock ring here, and you're going to thread the shock inward so it's shorter, just until the spring is just barely captured. So this one's actually, on this car, it's actually a little bit loose, so I'll probably tighten that up for him. But you want it so you can just barely move the spring. And the reason we do this is you're trying to keep that spring captured so you're not making noises as you're going around. And also you don't want to risk the spring popping out, when you're driving. But if you set up that way, you're going to get the most out of the rear suspension setup. Another thing worth mentioning is even if you're not using adjustable coilovers, let's just say you're using like a TRD spring and like a, I don't know, Koni shock, whatever you want to use, there will be a factory bump stop that comes down here, and there's usually 3 ribs. There's basically like 3 parts to it. You want to get that, you need to shorten it because the car's gonna be lower, and you want to make sure the height is, you still have a bump stop there, so when you do hit some like major bump, you want to make sure the axle is stopping there and not just running into the chassis. So for our purposes, we've measured this before when we kind of jacked up the axle to see where it's hitting, and we like to stop at just 2 nubs left, so just cutting the 1 and leaving 2. You could possibly go a little further, go down to 1 if the car is really low, but you want to try to have that bump stop there to protect your car if you just hit some major like bump when you're driving on the freeway or at the track. The last thing to mention, sorry, it's a little bit of a plug, but these are the Bgr Springs that we developed. It's a mildly progressive spring, and we designed these with Swift to make sure that the live axle is able to articulate as it's driving down the road. And the way the spring rate ramps up, it allows the axle to move around for smaller bumps, but as soon as you start to load up the car or hit a larger bump, it gets into the higher spring rate range. But I highly recommend those. It makes a big difference if you have a off-the-shelf coilover system, just that one change alone. All right, guys, we're at the front of the car now. One of the questions we get asked a lot is what kind of spring rates should I use on my Corolla? And it's an important choice because it can dramatically impact how the car feels and how it handles. So our general advice is if you're driving on the street and you're kind of like a weekend warrior, you might go to the track once in a while, maybe an autocross here and there, and your roads aren't super terrible, you can use a 7K spring rate in the front, and then we try to recommend someone to use like a 4.5K, either our BGR Swift, which again I really recommend, or maybe like a TRD spring or something like that. And if you are in a really bad area in terms of road quality, like San Francisco, we have a customer that's out there. We recommended him to run a 6K in the front, and then and also the 4.5 in the rear. But he could also have gone lower if you want. If you found like someone that made like a 3.9K spring, like I think AJPS used to make those springs. So you find one out there that could work. On the other hand, if you have a track car and you're going often and you have R comps, you might find yourself running as high as an 8K or a 9K spring on the front, and in the rear, to match that, you'd be using like a 5.5 or maybe a 6K spring to kind of balance it out. And so, as you guys know, a lot of people have been swapping in Beams engines. Nick's got a Beams engine in this car. In that case, that engine transmission combo adds a fair amount of weight to the chassis. So for that setup, we'll usually bump it up a K in the front. So if it's a car that we would have normally recommended to have a 7K in the front, we usually would steer them towards an 8K, and that's because the effective spring rate is lower when the car's heavier in the front. So as far as adjusting the damping on the shocks, we get people asking like, hey, where should I set the adjustment knob on my coilers? And that's one of those things that because each shock is different, there may not be a set rule, but if I'm just coming to a new car, clean slate, I don't know anything about it, it's good to start around the middle or around the softer setting to see how the car is doing, keep the clicks even front to rear, and then go up 2 or 3 clicks at a time, and make changes and just go one axle at a time and keep going up until you start to feel maybe performance or feel start to degrade. Like if it starts to get too uncomfortable or harsh, stop there and then come back a little bit. And that should get you pretty close to where you need to be.
Hopefully if you guys take anything away from this video, it's to build your car slowly and progress with it. Nobody likes when people overbuild chassis, so make sure you change out your 35-year-old rubbers, make sure you get some good tires, and balance your car.
I hope that whatever mods you do, they bring you joy, and it's something that you like about your car. But also, please be safe. Make sure you're using quality parts, changing brake fluid, using tires that are safe on the road.
Shit, I didn't think about this one. I'm sorry. So, with every modification, there's always positives, but there's also negatives to what you do. So always be aware of the downside to things and not thinking like the most expensive is the best option. There's always a way to balance things out with the car you have, the build you have. So keep that in mind, and I hope this video has been very informational.